The Zorath Empire ruled the stars like kings of a dark ocean. For centuries, no species had dared oppose them. Their fleets were massive, their weapons deadly, and their tactics flawless. Every war they fought ended in total victory, leaving planets burned, populations enslaved, and civilizations crushed beneath their merciless might. The galaxy had learned one thing clearly: resistance was useless. The Zorath believed themselves untouchable, unbeatable, the ultimate rulers of the cosmos. But in the quiet corners of the galaxy, whispers began to spread. A species that had once fought for survival against impossible odds was said to have returned. They were humans. The Zorath had only fragments of knowledge about them, scattered records from ancient times, tales of primitive star travel, and stories of violent wars on a blue planet called Earth. The records were old, incomplete, and almost forgotten. Most Zorath dismissed them as legend, yet curiosity gnawed at the edges of the Empire's pride. The humans had disappeared from known space centuries ago, leaving no trace. What had become of them? Why did these stories continue to reach the ears of Zorath historians and scouts? Admiral Karath, the greatest mind of the Empire, stood in his flagship's command chamber staring at the star charts with his cold, sharp eyes. His fleet surrounded him like a living mountain of steel and fire. He was confident. He had faced rebellious colonies, alien pirates, and even rival fleets twice his size, and crushed them all. Surely these humans were nothing more than a curiosity, an extinct species, a footnote in history. "Prepare the fleet for a demonstration of power," he said. His voice was smooth and firm, carrying the weight of command. "We will remind the galaxy why the Zorath Empire is unchallenged. We will show this lost species the meaning of fear." The officers around him nodded, their expressions reflecting confidence and expectation. They believed, as all Zorath did, that war was a matter of scale. More ships, more firepower, more destruction. Logic and precision would win every battle every time. But the humans, if they were even still alive, did not play by these rules. They had fought wars on Earth that the Zorath could never have imagined. Wars fought with courage, sacrifice, and cunning far beyond simple numbers. Their victories often came from sheer determination and the will to survive, not from superior technology. These were qualities the Zorath had long forgotten in their comfortable dominance. Karath's fleet moved toward the coordinates where humans were believed to exist. The ships gleamed in the darkness, lines of steel cutting through the void like deadly predators. Thousands of soldiers, pilots, and engineers waited for his orders. They expected obedience, surrender, and victory. They expected a war without struggle, a parade of conquest. But in the depths of the Empire, some whispered warnings. Old historians spoke quietly of human stubbornness, of their refusal to bow even in the face of annihilation. Few paid attention and most laughed. The Zorath had faced stubborn species before. Every one of them had fallen. Why would humans be any different? As the fleet approached human space, tension and anticipation filled every bridge. Stars streaked past, and the endless darkness of space seemed almost to watch them, as if the void itself knew that something extraordinary was coming. Admiral Karath felt a thrill, a familiar rush of power, but also a flicker of curiosity. There was a sense of mystery here, a shadow that had survived where others had failed, and that shadow would soon show itself, a shadow that the Zorath would come to regret underestimating. For the first time in centuries, the Empire's supreme confidence was about to meet a force that could not be measured by weapons alone. The humans were waiting, somewhere out there in the cold void, silent and ready. They were not just survivors. They were something far more dangerous. Warriors who refused to lose, no matter the cost. The stage was set. The Zorath believed they knew war. They were about to learn a lesson written not in fear but in fire, courage, and the unyielding heart of humanity. The Zorath fleet glided into orbit around the human colony, a ring of metal and fire stretching across the darkness of space. From orbit, the humans' world looked peaceful, almost fragile. Cities sparkled faintly like jewels, and the seas shimmered under the distant sun. For the Zorath, it was almost insulting, a civilization so small and quiet, daring to exist under their shadow. Admiral Karath's command chamber was filled with the hum of engines and the soft clatter of consoles. Officers moved efficiently, relaying orders and calculating attack patterns. Karath's eyes scanned the viewports, observing the tiny human settlements below. They were preparing to issue the standard demand for surrender. A few words of warning, a demonstration of power, and the planet would be theirs. It should have been simple. Transmit the surrender orders, Karath said, his voice calm, confident. Make them understand that resistance is meaningless. The message was sent, carried through subspace as a single, clear command. Surrender immediately, or face total annihilation. The response came faster than anyone expected. It was short, almost casual, yet carried a weight that struck the entire Zorath fleet. This is sovereign human territory. Leave now or face the consequences. Silence fell in the command chamber. The words were simple, ordinary even, but the tone was impossible to ignore. No fear, no hesitation. Just a quiet, unwavering statement of defiance. Karath's brow furrowed. He had faced stubborn species before, but none had ever spoken like this. He laughed, a sound meant to show confidence, but it faltered slightly. Consequences? Against the Zorath Empire. They cannot even comprehend the scale of our power. He ordered the fleet forward. Ships shifted, weapons primed, engines thrumming with deadly anticipation. Plasma cannons glowed. Missiles streaked into launch bays, and the silence of space was about to be shattered. The Zorath believed themselves unstoppable, and then it happened. From the darkness between the stars, a shadow emerged. A ship unlike any the Zorath had ever seen. It was massive, black as the void, and scarred with the marks of countless battles. Its silhouette seemed to hum with purpose, an unspoken challenge that reverberated through every Zorath sensor. The humans had come out to meet them. Identify that ship, Karath demanded, but his officers hesitated. This vessel did not match any known human record. It was old, powerful, alive somehow. Before the Zorath could react, the ship fired. A single volley, precise and devastating, tore through the nearest Zorath cruisers. Explosions blossomed in space like violent flowers, and the mighty fleet trembled. Another blast struck a battleship, ripping its hull in half. Silence followed, a silence heavy with disbelief. Karath's laughter had vanished. His confidence cracked. His mind raced. The humans were supposed to be weak, small, easily destroyed. Yet here was a single ship dismantling a fleet, striking with precision and ferocity no Zorath officer had imagined possible. On the human bridge, Captain Elias Vargo watched the Zorath fleet with steady eyes. Around him, his crew moved with calm efficiency, aware of every shot, every movement. They had trained for this, fought for this, and they carried the weight of a species that refused to vanish quietly. Target their flagship, Vargo commanded. His voice was calm, but inside he felt the familiar surge of determination that had carried humanity through countless wars. We make them remember the cost of underestimating humans. The Zorath fleet launched again, overwhelming in size, blazing with power. But every strike the humans returned shredded ships, tore apart armor, and left a trail of destruction in its wake. For the first time in centuries, the Zorath realized that war was not just about weapons. It was about heart, courage, and the refusal to yield. Karath's fleet had entered human space thinking this would be another victory. They had expected surrender. They had expected fear. Instead, they met a storm of fire and defiance. The galaxy had not seen war like this before, and the humans? They were only beginning. The human warship was unlike anything the Zorath had ever encountered. Its black hull stretched across the void like a jagged mountain, battered by age but radiating power. The ship bore scars from wars long past, evidence of battles that had tested humanity itself. It was called HSS Vengeance, a name that carried history, memory, and determination. Every line of its design spoke of survival. Every weapon was built to endure the impossible. On the bridge, Captain Elias Vargo stood tall, calm, and unwavering. Around him, his crew moved with quiet precision. Engineers adjusted weapons under smoke-filled corridors. Gunners monitored enemy movements with deadly focus, and medics prepared for the inevitable casualties. The air hummed with tension, but not fear. Humanity had faced extinction before. They had faced overwhelming odds on countless worlds, and they had survived. They had learned that courage was stronger than fear, and sacrifice was sometimes the only way to victory. Status report, Vargo said, his voice steady. Shields at 70%, sir. Weapons online, his tactical officer replied. Enemy fleet closing fast. Good, Vargo said. A calm smile touched his lips. Then we show them who we are. The Zorath fleet advanced, their numbers vast and terrifying. Their ships blazed with weapons far more powerful than any human vessel in recorded memory. They had faced countless opponents and destroyed them without mercy. But against the Vengeance, their calculations faltered. The first salvo from Vengeance struck with surgical precision. 3 Zorath cruisers, enormous and heavily armed, erupted into fire and debris. Explosions painted the darkness of space with deadly beauty. The Zorath were stunned. One warship, old and solitary, was annihilating their carefully coordinated formation. Panic rippled through the ranks for the first time in centuries. Admiral Karath's confidence shattered. "Increase firepower," he barked, fury mixing with disbelief. "Crush it." Missiles, plasma beams, and energy waves rained down upon the Vengeance, battering its shields and shaking its hull. Sparks flew inside the ship and alarms blared across every deck. Crew members shouted orders over the chaos, moving with the trained precision of soldiers who had seen the horrors of war and lived to fight another day. Yet the Vengeance held. It moved like a predator, striking where the enemy was weakest, exploiting every flaw in the Zorath formation. Another broadside, and a battleship disintegrated, torn apart by the human ship's relentless firepower. The Zorath had never faced tactics like this. War fought not only with weapons, but with heart, intelligence, and unyielding will. On the bridge, Vargo's eyes never left the enemy. "Target their flagship," he ordered calmly. "We take the head, and the body will follow." The crew responded with quiet urgency, each action a testament to their shared purpose. Engineers rerouted power through damaged systems. Medics carried wounded across broken corridors, and gunners fired relentlessly. They did not falter. Every human on board understood the stakes. They were not just fighting for survival. They were defending the spirit of humanity itself. Karath's officers whispered among themselves. How is this possible? One ship, one human ship, destroying our fleet?" The answer was clear even to the Zorath. Humans fought differently. They did not rely solely on numbers or raw power. They fought with memory, courage, and an unbreakable will. Every strike, every maneuver of the Vengeance carried the weight of history, the legacy of generations who had refused to die quietly. The first real clash was over almost as quickly as it had begun, but its impact echoed through the Zorath fleet. Ships that once moved with certainty now faltered. Confidence turned to hesitation. Pride turned to fear. Captain Vargo leaned slightly on the rail, looking out into the stars. The battle had only just begun, but already humanity had made its statement. They were not weak. They were not to be underestimated. They were alive, and they were ready to remind the galaxy of what humans could do when cornered, when challenged, and when driven by the fire in their hearts. The Vengeance floated in the darkness, battered but undefeated, a single warship against an empire. And the Zorath learned a terrifying truth. For every calculation, every strategy, there was something they could never account for. Humanity fought not just with weapons, but with soul, and the soul of humanity had just struck its first blow. The Vengeance had made its first mark on the Zorath fleet, but the cost was becoming clear. The enemy was not a single ship, nor even a small fleet, it was an empire. Waves of Zorath warships pressed closer, surrounding the human warship in a deadly embrace. Every direction the Vengeance turned brought more fire, more destruction, and more chaos. Captain Elias Vargo stood on the bridge, his eyes steady as the tactical displays flared with warnings. Shields were failing, engines strained, and the hull shuddered with every hit. The crew moved with urgent precision, working in a symphony of skill and courage. Every gunner fired relentlessly. Every engineer patched systems with hands scorched and bleeding. Every medic tended to the wounded even as the corridors shook around them. "Shields at 30%, his tactical officer reported, voice tense but resolute. "Hull integrity failing in sections 3 and 7. Vargo nodded. He knew the numbers. He knew the Vengeance could not withstand another full barrage. Yet surrender was not an option. Not for humanity, not for this crew. Reroute all power to forward weapons. Divert auxiliary shields to critical sections. "We do not break," he commanded. His words carried calm authority, but inside his heart beat like a war drum. The Zorath unleashed their fury. Battleships opened fire in perfect synchrony, massive energy beams cutting through space like rivers of destruction. Missiles streaked toward the Vengeance, detonating against shields that groaned under the strain. The bridge shook violently, alarms screamed, and fires erupted in lower decks. Crew members were thrown to the floor, yet they scrambled back to their stations. In the engineering bay, Lieutenant Mara Kestel crawled through smoke and sparks to repair a ruptured coolant line. She could feel the heat against her skin, the vibrations of the ship's agonizing movements, but she did not stop. "We keep her alive," she whispered almost to herself, "no matter what." Meanwhile, on the gun deck, Sergeant Holt barked orders, shouting over the chaos. "Keep firing! Do not let them think we are weak. Focus on their flagship, hit it now." Explosions rocked the ship, yet the gunners did not falter. Every shot that connected was a strike against an empire that had believed itself untouchable. The Zorath commanders grew frustrated. They had faced stubborn opponents before, but none had fought with this intensity, this refusal to die. Karath roared over his comms, "Crush them! Show no mercy!" Yet his officers whispered in fear. One, trembling, said, "Admiral, they do not fear death. They fight with their hearts, not their weapons. This is unnatural," and he was right. The vengeance was more than steel and plasma. It was the embodiment of human resilience, of centuries of struggle, of species that had survived floods, wars, plagues, and extinction. Every maneuver, every strike, every sacrifice carried the weight of humanity's history. The cost was high. Fires raged across the Vengeance's hull. Shields flickered, and crew members were injured, some badly. Yet they continued to fight. They carried each other, patched each other up, and refused to yield. Humanity had learned to survive impossible odds, and now that lesson played out in the cold void of space. Captain Vargo stood firm, watching the endless waves of enemy ships. He knew they might not survive this battle, but he also knew something greater. Even in the face of overwhelming power, even when surrounded, humanity would never surrender. Defiance was not a choice, it was a birthright. And in that defiance, the first cracks in the Zorath arrogance began to show. Their perfectly ordered lines faltered. Confidence turned to doubt. Even their mighty empire could not comprehend a force that fought with such unyielding heart. The Vengeance was wounded, its crew battered, its systems failing. But it was alive. And as long as it breathed, humanity would stand. Because humans did not fight for victory alone. They fought for each other, for memory, for honor, for survival, and that made them unstoppable. The Vengeance shuddered under the relentless assault of the Zorath fleet. Explosions tore through corridors. Alarms screamed across decks, and the air smelled of burning metal and scorched circuits. Yet the crew moved with unwavering purpose, as if the chaos itself could not touch them. Captain Elias Vargo stood on the bridge, his gaze steady as he watched the enemy. His hands rested lightly on the rail, but inside, his mind raced with calculations, strategies, and most importantly, hope. He knew the odds. He knew the Vengeance was only one ship against an empire, yet he also knew the truth. Humans had always fought harder when hope seemed impossible. "Damage report," he ordered. "Shields at 15%, sir," his tactical officer replied. "Hull integrity critical. Crew casualties are high." Vargo's jaw tightened, but he did not flinch. "Then we fight harder. Every shot counts. Every action matters. We do not yield." Below decks, the crew was performing miracles. Engineers crawled through smoke-choked corridors to repair damaged reactors. Sparks flew and metal groaned as they worked with scorched hands, sweat mixing with soot on their faces. Medics carried wounded soldiers through narrow passageways, ignoring their own exhaustion. Some of the crew had lost limbs, some had burns covering their bodies, yet they fought on. Their eyes were filled with a quiet determination that burned brighter than any laser. Lieutenant Mara Kestel shouted over the chaos, "Keep her running. Keep her alive." Her voice was raw with strain, but every word carried the fire of defiance. She moved from one broken panel to another, reconnecting circuits and rerouting power, refusing to let the ship die. On the gun decks, Sergeant Holt barked orders with relentless energy. "Focus fire on their cruisers. Target their formation. Do not stop." Lasers streaked across the darkness of space, hitting Zorath ships with deadly precision. Explosions lit up the void as human crews struck again and again, refusing to yield even as the enemy seemed endless. From the bridge, Vargo watched the battle unfold, heart swelling with pride and fear in equal measure. The Zorath commanders had expected fear, surrender, hesitation, but they found none. Every human aboard the Vengeance fought not just for survival, but for each other. For every crew member fallen, another stepped up. For every section of the ship breached, another was repaired. Humanity's strength was not in numbers or technology. It was in its courage, its resolve, and its unbreakable will. Admiral Karath's fleet wavered. He had faced countless opponents who had feared his power, who had submitted or fled. But the humans did not fear. They did not retreat. They did not beg. They fought, unflinching, unyielding, relentless. One young gunner, barely more than a boy, continued firing even after his station exploded, and smoke choked the room. His hands were blistered, his face streaked with dirt and blood, yet he kept aiming. Around him, others covered him, replaced fallen crew, and kept the guns firing. It was not training alone. It was a force born of defiance, of pride, of the human spirit refusing to bow. Vargo's voice cut across the chaos, calm and resolute. Remember why we fight. Remember who we are. Humanity survives because we refuse to surrender. That is our power. That is our heart. The vengeance moved through the void like a living embodiment of human determination. Ships fell around it. Zorath vessels shattered by relentless fire, yet the human crew pressed on. Every strike they delivered, every sacrifice they made, chipped away at the invincible image of the Zorath Empire. And slowly the first seeds of fear took root among the enemy. For the first time, the Zorath realized that this was not just a battle. It was a testament to the heart of humanity, and the vengeance, battered, scarred, and burning, led the charge, because humanity never fought for easy victories. They fought for each other, for survival, for honor, and for the unshakable truth that no empire, no matter how vast, could ever break the heart of a human determined to live. The vengeance was battered and bleeding, its hull scarred by countless blasts, its shields flickering under constant assault. The corridors were filled with smoke and fire, alarms blaring in every sector. Crew members stumbled, their uniforms torn and faces blackened with soot, yet no one surrendered. Humanity had always faced impossible odds, and today was no different. Captain Elias Vargo stood on the bridge, eyes fixed on the unfolding chaos. He had calculated every risk, anticipated every attack, yet even he could not ignore the staggering scale of the enemy fleet. Zorath battleships surrounded the vengeance on all sides, their weapons firing in a relentless symphony of destruction. Yet Vargo's expression remained calm, his voice steady as he addressed his crew. Hold your positions. Focus your fire. Every shot counts. Every sacrifice matters. We do not break and we do not bow. Below decks, the crew continued to fight as if the ship itself were alive. Engineers repaired ruptured conduits while dodging sparks and flames. Medics pulled wounded crew from smoking corridors, ignoring their own exhaustion. Even the youngest recruits, barely trained for such horrors, moved with courage that belied their age. Each of them knew that surrender meant death, and humanity did not surrender. The Zorath, sensing a potential victory, unleashed their most devastating volleys. Missiles ripped through the void, energy beams tore at the hull, and the vengeance shuddered violently under each impact. Crew members were thrown to the floor, panels exploded around them, and smoke filled every corridor. Yet even as they fought near the edge of exhaustion, the humans did not falter. Then, in the midst of chaos, came a signal. At first it was faint, almost lost in the roar of battle. Then it became unmistakable. A fleet, human ships appearing out of the darkness of space, moving with precision, speed, and purpose. Frigates, destroyers, carriers, all answering the call of the vengeance. Humanity had come to aid its lone champion. A cheer rose from the vengeance's bridge, quiet at first, then louder as the crew realized what was happening. Hope surged through every heart. They were no longer alone. Together, humanity would stand against the Empire. Captain Vargo's voice rang out, calm yet filled with renewed strength. Prepare for full coordination. We strike as one fleet. Today we remind the galaxy that humans do not bow. The Zorath fleet hesitated. They had expected isolation. They had expected a single ship alone to be crushed beneath their might. Instead, they faced not only the vengeance but an entire human armada converging in the void. Confusion rippled through their lines, followed by fear. For the first time, the Zorath realized that numbers alone could not guarantee victory. The vengeance surged forward, leading the charge. Every shot fired, every maneuver executed was precise and deadly. With reinforcements joining, the humans struck like a tidal wave, ripping through Zorath formations. One by one, cruisers and battleships fell, torn apart by combined human firepower. Even as damage spread across the vengeance, the crew felt a new energy, the knowledge that they were no longer fighting alone. Each strike from their weapons, each repair completed in smoke-filled corridors, and each wounded comrade supported by another became part of a greater force. They were not just surviving, they were turning the battle. Admiral Karath, watching his fleet falter, roared in frustration. He had faced countless rebellions, countless wars, yet never had an opponent risen from near defeat to challenge his empire so decisively. Humanity, he realized, was unlike any species he had encountered. They fought with courage, with intelligence, and above all with heart. The first cracks in the Zorath confidence spread rapidly. Ships that had once fired with precision now faltered, their crews panicked. They had underestimated humans, and that mistake would cost them dearly. The Vengeance, though battered, glided through the chaos like a beacon. Its firepower, combined with the newly arrived fleet, was unstoppable. Humanity's determination had become a storm, a force that no empire could ignore. And for the first time, the tide of battle was shifting. The galaxy watched in silence as one human warship, nearly destroyed, led an entire species to defy an empire. The lesson was clear. Humans never surrendered. Humans never backed down. And humanity's heart, burning brighter than any star, could change the course of war itself. Fleets shattered by the relentless courage of humanity. The Vengeance floated among the debris, battered, smoking, and scarred, yet still alive. Its shields flickered weakly, and hull breaches ran like scars along its blackened surface. Inside, the crew moved with exhaustion etched into every face, but there was no despair, only quiet triumph. Captain Elias Vargo stood on the bridge, his gaze sweeping over the wreckage. The enemy had been defeated, but the cost had been high. Half the crew were injured, some critically. Engineers had labored for hours to keep the ship functioning. Medics had worked without pause, saving lives with trembling hands and unwavering hearts. Every single soul aboard had poured themselves into this fight, and their sacrifices had not been in vain. Around him, the crew began to breathe more freely. Gunners slumped in their chairs, still alert but no longer frantically firing. Officers whispered quietly, checking systems and casualties. They shared small nods, subtle smiles, and silent acknowledgement of their shared ordeal. Together, they had survived what no one thought possible. From the viewport, the stars beyond looked peaceful again, yet every light seemed different now. Humanity had carved its presence into the galaxy with fire, courage, and unyielding determination. The Zorath, the empire that had ruled the stars for centuries, had learned something they would never forget. One species armed not just with weapons but with heart, unity, and unbreakable will could defy an entire empire. Vargo's voice was quiet, yet every word carried the weight of history. "Remember this moment," he said. "Remember why we fight and what it means to survive. We do not surrender. We do not yield. That is who we are." His crew nodded. Some wept quietly, overwhelmed by relief and exhaustion. Others clasped hands or hugged in silent celebration. They were alive. Humanity was alive, and the galaxy had witnessed it. Admiral Karath's fleet, those who had survived, were retreating in disorder. Confusion and fear spread through the remnants of the once mighty empire. They had underestimated the humans, and the cost of that mistake would echo through Zorath history. The arrogance of centuries had been shattered by the courage of a single warship and its crew. In the corridors of the Vengeance, engineers patched the last critical systems, medics attended to the final injured, and the crew began to breathe with a sense of peace they had not felt in hours, perhaps years. Every corner of the ship held a story of sacrifice, courage, and determination. Every scar on the hull was proof that humans fought not only for themselves but for each other, and for the survival of their species. Vargo stepped to the edge of the bridge, looking at the endless expanse of stars. For a moment, silence reigned. Then faintly he allowed himself a small smile. Humanity had stood alone against the mightiest empire in the galaxy, and had prevailed. The lesson was clear, not only to the Zorath, but to the entire galaxy. War was not measured in numbers alone, in size, or in technological superiority. It was measured in courage and sacrifice, in the willingness to fight when all seems lost. Humanity had shown the galaxy that their strength was not only in their weapons, but in their hearts. As the Vengeance set course for home, battered but unbroken, the crew looked at one another. Each face reflected exhaustion, pride, and a quiet, unshakable knowledge. They had survived. They had fought. And they had proven, beyond any doubt, that humans could endure anything, overcome any enemy, and stand against the impossible. The stars seemed to shine a little brighter as the Vengeance sailed through the void. Humanity had endured. Humanity had triumphed. And the galaxy had learned a truth that no empire could ever ignore. When humans fight, they fight not just to win, but to survive, to endure, and to claim their place among the stars. Captain Vargo whispered softly, almost to himself as he watched the stars stretch endlessly before them. We are humans. We do not break. We do not yield. And we will never be forgotten. The galaxy would never